Which one's the best crypto asset? Well, Bitcoin's the best crypto asset. Okay. What's the second best? There is no second best. There is no second best crypto asset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Why Bitcoin Show. I'm your host, Dale Warburton. It's a weekly podcast on why Bitcoin matters and what makes it completely different to all other cryptocurrencies. If you're interested in Bitcoin and you'd like to distill crypto fact from fiction, you've come to the right place. And we're live. All right, so I'm very pleased to introduce my next guest today, Meyrick from Amber. Welcome to the show.
Hey Dale, thanks for having me. Yeah,
really good to finally have a conversation on my part. It was really cool to chat on yours. And I think you mentioned something to me on your pod and it left me thinking afterwards. And I was like, I feel like a bit of a dick because you were one of the first people I spoke to about thinking about doing a podcast. So it's just like, I didn't even give you credit. So you should get it. You should get some credit too. Because I often said, Jake kicked me in the ass, but I think you also inspired me because when you came and spoken which Bush Bash was it now? Was it Mara?
Mara. Yes, that was at Mara. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, awesome. I've got to get in. I've got to go and chat to this dude. You had a really interesting presentation. And I thought like, yeah, man, you've got to do it. And to be honest, I was just a chicken. I didn't do it for such a long time. And I'm so stoked to be on the journey. So you played your small part, however small it might have been at the time, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think putting yourself out there comes with the fear of being judged. I think that's the main thing that would hold someone back.
Yeah. You're spot on. That's exactly what I was thinking. It was like, you know, when people said, why don't you just do it? I said, I don't know what I'm going to say that's valuable. But yeah, it's exactly that. It's that judgment. But it was ultimately the support of the community that kicked me in the ass because I don't know if I necessarily had it in me organically. Even though I'm someone who's got confidence, it was still just like, I don't think I'm that unique. I don't think I've got anything unique to say. I mean, how am I going to beat Peter McCormick, you know?
It's pretty obvious that you are more confident, like if I compare myself to you. And then for me, it was the total opposite. Like, because I'm not confident, I was like, no, I have to do this podcasting. I have to put myself out there. I still don't do it on video. I still get annoyed listening to my own voice in the recordings. I think I've heard from many people that's common, but yeah.
Totally. And I think, you know, what you're saying is, as someone who's not necessarily kind of someone who would put themselves out in the spotlight, you went and did something really difficult, and it's like you've got some sort of mental strength because it's not necessarily within your strengths. And maybe we'll talk about jiu-jitsu later because that's also about putting yourself in very uncomfortable positions.
Yes.
and getting beaten up day in, day out, and then eventually progressing. I'd like to just start off today by touching at kind of a high level how you first got introduced to Bitcoin. Everyone's story is different, and I don't actually know yours, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. The first touch point with Bitcoin, I mean, yeah, I'll start with the first touch point with Bitcoin, I guess. It was back when I was 17, maybe probably 16, 2010. This is 2010, right? I heard about this thing on the internet. You have to download few softwares, keep your computer plugged in and the internet on, and you can make some money. I was like, okay, cool. We'll give it a go. You download these softwares. There's like this, I don't know what it was doing. I just downloaded it. I followed the instructions, plug and play. It said there's this important string of characters that you keep safe. It's like, okay, keep it safe. So best thing I could do was write it on a sticky note, put it in my drawer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rock solid.
That was my first touch point with Bitcoin. But then, and I had that mining software running linked to this DOS like looking, it was a wallet back then. I can't remember what it was called, but it was linked to that. And there was no BIP39. So there was no seed phrase. So there was that long string that you had to keep. Yeah. So, but at the same time, I was playing Counter-Strike, this computer game, right? So my Counter-Strike started getting really laggy. So after a week of having this Bitcoin thing running on my computer, I deleted everything.
Oh gosh. Oh dear.
Yeah, I didn't know think about it. I just said, oh, you can make some money, and it's like that was the like first touch. And then yeah, fast forward 2017, we just had like extra spare cash, and it's like, okay, gotta. I mean, I always had it. Like I used to work as a banker, so I know like the value prop of like having some funds aside for the future, blah blah blah. But then where's the best place to keep these funds? And that's when I started looking more into first into Bitcoin, and then there's like, oh, diversify, right? So okay, so then I started looking at these other cryptos and like finding out what's the best or blah blah blah. But so then yeah, back in 2017, come back to it from an investment perspective, and then towards 2019 as like yeah, that's when I totally like, oh no, all these other coins are crap and there's only one. Yeah, so that's
There's
like
no
the
second
backstory.
best.
Yeah, there's no second best. Exactly.
Exactly. So because the show is the Why Bitcoin show, and I want to touch on crypto, I typically think the usual percentage that I've been nailing is like sort of 80 to 90% Bitcoin, 10% crypto. So maybe we do the 10% crypto now because you mentioned it. Talk to me a little bit about now how you see crypto differently to Bitcoin, and what's your what's your model around that particular difference?
I mean, as you said, like there's no second best, but why there's no second best? As to like, I think Kanut puts it best. That you can create, I forget the term he uses, but basically an asset that doesn't have inflation, you can create only one of it. Creating another asset or another money that is inflation proof is just creating more inflation.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the idea behind it, as to like why just one money is required. Oh, and then these other, I mean, it gets very obvious when you start looking at these other cryptos, like what's the agenda. Like they try to they try to have some use case behind it. It's like selling reward points or something, right? Like they're trying to sell you reward points as money.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if this is the right term that Knut uses, but it's like you can only create absolute digital scarcity once.
Yes.
Something to that effect. But yeah, I think yeah, I mean, what you're talking about really there is that kind of Bitcoin is money. All these other things that claim to be money, they can't really be money. And that's a common sort of way that I think most Bitcoiners tend to view it. And yeah, let's not beat on that drum anymore. I'm happy to let that one lie, because I think yeah, I suppose that's the easiest differentiation that I've got, unless you've got anything further to add on the crypto side, eh?
No, nothing further, but it's like it goes back to like, if there's going to be an asset that can be created digitally, so then it begs the question whether it's that old argument, whether it is an discovery or whether it was an invention. Because like if you go down that path, if it's going to be, it's there, something that's digital, it's just waiting to be discovered. But then the other aspect is like you need all these other building blocks for it to be invented. So yeah, I'm not sure where that argument lies, but yeah, but it was waiting to be discovered in our digital realm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, that makes sense. So what I was interested to find out though is like, when you think about money, and both of us have come from BRICS nations. Oh, we're going to take over the world apparently. But I'd be interested to understand a little bit about your upbringing in India and sort of your beliefs around money. As I understand, Indians are actually, it's one of the populations that has the highest amount of gold per household or something like that. And I'd love you to just to share a little bit about that, because to me that's quite a fascinating sort of cultural difference, because South Africans, we're not too big on the gold.
Yeah, I'm not sure from where the fascination of gold comes to India. Even like personally, like from the region in India that I'm brought up or that I've lived my whole life, comes from a very Christian dominated place, which is like a small pocket in India, you could say, right? Like it's an isolated area. Like the suburbs that I lived around is dominate. Like it's like there's churches everywhere, not temples. And the people around me are like 90% are like Roman Catholic. So culturally, like quite different compared to the broader population. but there's still the fascination for gold. So even though it's like like Roman Catholic, there's like, yeah, there's people. My dad used to joke like there's people from my mom's side of the family or that community, because my dad's from a different region, mom's from a different region, and even though both are Roman Catholics, but they're different regions, and there's like these people are. My mom's side of the family is like more like likes to flash gold, and they like wear like these big, heavy, yeah, like
Yes.
even the men, right? Like they wear like some fascination for it. I'm not sure where that comes from. I guess it's like, yeah, I'm not entirely sure like where that comes from, but there was always this history of these old temples that are filled, that the statues in there have all gold ornaments. And then when India was invaded, there's like first by the Arabs, the statues were broken down, gold stolen. Then by European nations, similar things happened. And apparently there's a temple that has like these I'll shoot you a link, or if maybe could put it in the show notes. Quite fascinating, because there's this hidden I mean, not a hidden wall, but there's this massive door underneath a temple, never been entered, but apparently behind that door is the most amount of gold. It probably, like if someone has access to it, it could yeah, topple the gold market. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's the theory.
Never heard of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that is interesting. And then just around sort of when you grew up, I mean, and you said you were in banking and that sort of thing. Did you ever think about what fiat was? And did you, I mean, was that even something that registered on your mind, fractional reserve banking and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, before I go there, I just wanted to point out one thing, like something my grandmom used to say in the local language, but what she was saying is the money doesn't have value anymore. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like this was when I was young. I was asking her for cents back then. It's like, yeah, a rupee. I mean, 50 rupees makes up Australian dollar. So I was asking her for a fraction of that, right, to go buy some sweets or whatever. And then I was like, oh, earlier I used to ask her for a rupee, and then now I'm asking her for 10, and then soon I had been asking her for 100. And she's like, oh, this is like, why do you need like 100 rupees? It's like, oh, because I need to buy blah blah blah. And she's like, oh, things are getting so expensive, this money doesn't have any value anymore. And like, because she was using a denomination of money that was below the rupee even. So there's like, have you have dollar for cents, there
Yes.
was like rupees and paise,
Wow.
that's yeah, not existent anymore. But there was like this other current, like this other denomination before you get to a rupee even, and that was being used at my grandmom's time. And then inflation, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, with my banking experience, because I started as a junior banker and then worked into different areas of at branch level banking. It really boggled my mind that there's like, as per our books, we have say $100,000 for all our customers, but in our worlds we just have to maintain 10% of that, right? So there's like, yeah, so where's the other money? And then, oh, the other money is with the reserve bank. And then there's like thousands of banks all over India who have like the similar model, and the rest of the money is in the reserve bank. But then actually there's no physical money, right? Like it's all digital. And yeah, yeah, so then yeah.
Exactly.
And I also worked in the banking, yeah, in the banking industry, while during the time that India went through the demonetization phase. That's when, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but that's when the government, I think it was a Saturday evening, probably a Sunday evening, the government says the highest denomination notes, that being the 1,000 and 500 rupees,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, yeah, are not money anymore. Now it's just, yeah, that's not money anymore. As of now, as he announced it, that's not money anymore. And
So
then
these are like little seeds being planted in you. That's just like going, what's
yes,
actually going on here? Because now that you mention it, yeah, I do remember that. It was like, didn't that create some sort of rush to actually just get rid of all these
yes,
particular notes that were soon
yep.
to be worth absolutely nothing? I mean, yeah, it's a very strange situation, isn't it?
It is, yeah, because I was working in the banking industry then, right? Like, so every few days we had new laws, and that went on for like 3 weeks or 4 weeks, yeah. And like one day it's like, oh, people can exchange up to 10,000 rupees, for example. Next day it's like only old people can exchange money today. Next day it's like something else, and then something else and something else, and it kept going on. And what happened in the background of all this is like a black market got created because you are, as an individual, you're limited to how much you could exchange, right? So the black market deal was you can buy, basically it worked around gold again. So it's like if you're using your old currency notes to buy gold, you get gold at a extremely higher price. But if you use like the new currency, you get gold at a extremely reduced price.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the black market is always, firstly, the existence of a black market is always the first indication that something's not right.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to money. And then also the black market is the true value, whatever the stated value. I read a book.
The free market value.
Yeah, exactly. That's the free market value. I've read a few books by this chap called Jim Rogers. He's like he's an investor who's traveled around the world, and very interesting dude. And yeah, like the first thing he does when he goes to new markets is he tries to establish, is there actually a black market for this particular currency? Because he'd go across the border and there'd be one official rate and be like, no, I'm going to try to find out what the real rate is here for my dollars. Yeah, that's interesting. So these seeds are all planted, and I'm not sure what the story is currently in India, but are there things like capital controls to stop people from sending money out of the country and that kind of thing today?
Yep.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah, they've introduced like a new law just probably a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. Don't quote me on this, but from my understanding, or at least I saw someone breaking down what exactly the law was. So if I'm in India and I'm paying, say, Amazon like Audible subscription, and Amazon does have an Indian entity, but for the purpose of this, like for an example, say Amazon didn't have an Indian entity and it was only based in the US. So technically I'm paying for this subscription to a US entity. So I'm going to be taxed on all the subscription payments. Wow. So say if it was Netflix, and I'm paying so I pay the monthly subscription fee plus a tax on top of that.
Wow.
And it all adds up. So you do have like a window of, let's say, $10,000, but that's including your travel. So you travel to the States from India and you're going to be spending $5,000 there. Then you've used up your $5,000. Then you're using for your subscription services another $1,000, $2,000. Then that's reduced. And then over and above that, then you start paying this ridiculous tax amount. I think it's 30%.
It's insane. And I think what a lot of, I guess, most of our audience is probably Australian. And, you know, we tend to we look at the US and we go, oh, fiat currencies are all bullshit, blah, 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 blah. But then you're like, well, hold my beer. You should see what the rupee's like or the rand is like. And then you start realizing actually all the rules they have in place to stop people from actually trying to actually store their value in something actually worthwhile. In South Africa, again, these figures might be slightly off now, but if you want, you can move out up to, it's about $70,000 out of the country per annum per person, so per tax payer, right? You can invest that offshore and that's gone. And then, but you obviously still pay tax on all the gains and all that jazz.
Yep.
As long as you're tax resident. And then the other thing is, if you want to move more than it's 10 million rand, so it'd be like something along the lines of like 750,000 Aussie, you need to talk to the Reserve Bank. Okay, so if you're someone, you need to get their approval. So you can imagine, and that is like apparently the form to get that done is like that long. So you want to buy like a property offshore, you know, you want to buy an Australian property, like not even a big one. Yeah, you're going to need to speak to Reserve Bank in South Africa. So yeah, this is you know, Alex Gladstein would say, check your financial privilege, because it's all relative. I think whether you're, you know, here in Australia, I'm stoked to have the Aussie dollar, even though we know it's losing value. It could be a far worse situation for me in South Africa. I always remember that too.
Yeah. Wow. Have you read The Sovereign Individual?
Oh yeah. Big fan. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the gist of it at the end of the day is, I think eventually governments are going to be competing for citizens, and I think they're going to be competing for talent. And a lot of those people with talent and capital are going to be Bitcoiners, and they're going to create really friendly jurisdictions, and that's my dream. I see that in the next decade, probably.
Speaking of India, another insane rule India has around Bitcoin is for someone to sell Bitcoin, that being an individual or an entity, an exchange, they have to source the Bitcoin in India.
Jeez, how do you even ensure that? Hey,
I think the Reserve Bank of India is stamping the UTXOs.
God, that's so insane. I think that's an example where it seems as if a government, bureaucrat made some sort of rule, and it just can't really have any proper application in the real world. Because I mean, how on earth can you fully trace the origins? It must be Indian Bitcoin. I mean, that makes very little sense.
Did you guys have something known as Hawala transactions? If you know what Hawala transactions are, I can no. Okay. So in India actually this started with the Gulf countries and India, or Dubai and India, with the mafia.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's like mafia from India that have moved to the Gulf, vice versa. So basically it is, say if I have money in Dubai and I needed to send it to my family in India, for example, I can go and give some individuals in Dubai the cash, and my family will get delivered cash in India.
Yeah, like not gun runners, but cash runners, basically. Yeah. It's the thing I love, and this seems to be the case in India, in South Africa, all of these developing nations. These people are they're actually like really creative. They find great ways to get out of like really stupid laws and things that are holding them back, and it doesn't surprise me in the least.
No, and so that's international, right? Like from what I understand, currently it's happening. There's like a major boom of it happening locally, and now there's Bitcoin involved as well.
Gosh.
So yeah, so
further complicates things.
I don't know. Depending on how savvy someone is, you could buy, what do you say, KYC free Bitcoin for it. Like you are just using cash, right? Like you can just exchange cash, pay it to someone, pay to someone's family, going back to the same example, and that other individual will send you the Bitcoin. You don't have to meet in person. But yeah, there's trust involved in such things, of course.
Yes, exactly. Very hard to extract trust, but yeah, that's interesting. Hey, well, no, anyway, yeah. So I thought it'd be cool just to talk a little bit about your background and how it relates to money, because many of the things you're saying, I mean, they're very different to my experience, but at the same time, it's just like the themes are the same, or let's just rather say it rhymes. It's not exactly the same. I want to shift gears and I'll talk a little bit about your time here now in Australia. We're very blessed here in Australia to have more Bitcoin exchanges than the US, as far as I understand. Bitcoin only exchanges, let's be clear about that one. And I guess what I was keen to just unpack there was some of the challenges associated with running an exchange in Australia. And there's a couple different themes that I sort of would love you just to touch on at a pretty high level. I guess the one is we've got a lot of competition here. So it's I suppose it would be much easier if there was one only. In South Africa, they got literally one Bitcoin only exchange. And by the way, they shut down last month.
Yeah.
Pretty sad, and I'm trying to figure out what happened there, but I think we've got 5. So yeah, how does one deal with the competitors? Then you've got your shitcoin casinos, which have tons and tons of marketing dollars, and how do we compete with them? And then let's leave it at that, and then maybe we can touch on some other things.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as an individual, I prefer that there are more Bitcoin exchanges, right? Like from a business perspective, I'd want less. But even from a business perspective, it's good that there are more Bitcoin only exchanges. It's that concept. Like I'll tell you, I'll get an example in place. Right outside my school back in India, there used to be a single shop that used to sell toys, and then soon there were like 5 shops that are selling toys. Like there's just 5 shops all opposite each other, next to each other, that are selling toys. And then that just became a hub. Like, oh, you need to go buy toys for someone, you just go down that street, right? So the more exchanges or Bitcoin only exchanges are competing with each other in the same region, and they're focused only on Bitcoin, it just makes it clearer to the general public, like why these guys are doing this. Like, why are they only focusing on Bitcoin? It just shines more light, I guess, on Bitcoin. Yeah.
That's actually, that's a good way to think of it, because Yeah, like I suppose when I think of, say, podcasters, I don't look at you as like a competitor. We're colleagues in a way, like,
Yes.
and I actually learned this first from Joe Rogan when he used to speak about comedians, and there were some comedians who were like sneaky, and they'd go and steal people's jokes, and they'd hear the story and be like, and then run on stage and tell this guy's joke, and he'd be sitting in the green room, and he's like, "Dude, I just heard your joke. That's my shtick or whatever. I can't remember the term is." And
Yeah.
and what Joe does, he's like going, "Hey man, we're all here to support each other and help each other." And what he's done is just like bring a ton of, I mean, can you imagine how much talent that guy has brought on board? And it seems to be a similar thing in podcasting. And kind of what you're doing is you're saying, well, it's actually similar with Bitcoin exchanges, because the more we see that there's more Bitcoin exchanges and they focus in it, the more the general public realizes actually that's really what matters.
Yeah, 100%. And like going back to podcasting, I remember I think you recently had Carrie on your podcast. I think,
Yes.
yeah. And like I remember meeting Carrie at a local meetup, and she's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna start my podcast." It's like, "Yeah, good, go for it." And I think she had maybe one episode out, and like I was like, "And what are you doing about it?" And I was like, had a look. Oh, it's just on YouTube. I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna call you this weekend, and I'm gonna help you set up an Anchor account, and then that way it's gonna be like it's gonna populate on all podcasting platforms, right?" Like
Yeah.
I don't see her as a competitor. It's like, oh, more of us. Basically.
Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
weird thing in Bitcoin. It's really weird because every other business you'd have, if I was running like a share brokerage or like an equity platform, like I'm literally studying like who's got what sort of market share, how can we differentiate ourselves? Is it like service or fees or branding, or what are we going to do differently? And I think with the Bitcoin exchanges here, it feels like we kind of, you guys are pulling in the same direction. Obviously, ultimately, you are competing for sort of psychopathic Bitcoiners who want to just DCA because that's a nice annuity income. But it is awesome how it just feels like the general spirit is one of like, we're all in this together, and it's a sort of rising tide lifts all ships kind of way of thinking. So that's a cool way to think about it. I guess what we're also seeing, and this is now a question on the regulatory side, we're seeing in the US right now, some people have called it Operation 2.0 or Chokepoint 2.0,
Yep.
and it's quite obvious, I think, globally, I mean, whatever label you want to call it, that there is now increased scrutiny for the on-ramps and off-ramps. And
Right.
we know, like, peer-to-peer, there's nothing that can be done, but people still want to actually live in the real world, switch out to fiat. What's your sort of read on the way things are mapping out here? I mean, there's stuff around, we've seen some exchanges here, I think, have some challenges. I don't know if you've got any thoughts or if you can make any comments.
Yeah, for sure. I think first it would be good for some of the listeners to know what Operation Chokepoint is.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I think this was in Obama's first term. They actually put it down in writing. So they were targeting cannabis businesses and I believe prostitution. So the idea is like we can have these businesses running, or like so it's legal in a state, and then this cannabis business is running there, or multiple businesses are running there. But what we'll do is we'll cut them at their banking level and basically just cut them at their feet, right? Like this, yeah, just chop off their legs. So they have a business, but they can't operate. And that's what now it's come. So they're calling it Chokepoint 2.0 for crypto businesses / Bitcoin businesses, right? So that's what Operation Chokepoint is. And yeah, we're seeing that happening on a larger scale in the US, but we're also seeing that happening here because you get like messages like just with Commonwealth, because with Commonwealth I get a message, oh, we're gonna limit your transfer, your crypto related transfers to X amount in a month, and we're also going to block them without any notice to you, or we can keep them on hold as long as we like. And then I also and I'm also with another bank, and then I don't often use that bank, but I used it to make a transfer once, and they locked me out of my own account. I had to, and I call them up. I probably send, you know how it is, you call a bank, you're spending several hours
Good
talking to a
luck.
machine. And then when you finally get to that person, he's like, oh, you got to visit the branch. It's like, fuck. So then I had to go, get an appointment, go visit the branch, tell them, yes, I know what I'm doing with my money. And then, yes, I wanted that $200 to go through.
It's
And
unbelievable, hey?
yeah.
And it's something that I've long thought about, because I believe that there will be a day. I mean, we can get down into CBDCs later if you like, but I think there will be a day when they can be programmed in such a way that it'll be like, I'm put on a computer voice now. You've reached your limit to all crypto exchanges. You can't buy more than $1,000's worth of Bitcoin a month.
100%.
I think that's going to happen. I don't even think it's a question of if. I think it's a when.
Yeah.
And I'm already like sort of sniffing signs that this could be like sooner than 5 years.
I mean, and probably within 10 years is like you've reached your upper limit of buying beef.
Oh my God. Well, not if we have something to do with it, man. No, not with the beef initiative and other things like that. No, So on the regulatory side, I mean, just from a business perspective, I understood just from other exchanges, there's always been, it almost feels as if you're being treated kind of differently to other businesses, like you're doing something illegal, and the higher level of scrutiny, and there is that sense. So it is a bit unfortunate to kind of hear, but that does seem, is that fair to say that's kind of been the experience?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Like you try to get like banking partners in different regions, and it's the same thing. Crypto, recently there's like all these things like Silvergate, or they bring up anything, right? Like FTX or whatever it is. Like, they bring up anything that happened in the last 2 years, and they'd be like, we don't deal in crypto. And they basket everything. Like, obviously they'd basket Bitcoin with crypto,
Yeah, I mean, I can almost see a day where they might make life so difficult for exchanges that they go, okay, no, you can have your Bitcoin. Don't stress, man. You can buy this ETF, and then they control the company that has the ETF. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, and then you go like, I can actually redeem that, and they go, well, we hold the keys. We're the boss here. Sorry. And I think the sovereignty is basically what I think is where the opposition comes in. I don't like, without going too far down that route, it's just like, it doesn't feel as if they are in favor of self-sovereignty.
Yeah, I'll ask you one thing. Like, what do you think? Who do you think is the biggest crypto casino in the world?
Binance.
Yeah, so Binance has by far, right? Like it's over 50%. By far, they're the biggest casino or crypto exchange. And then first, I don't know. I can speak for Australia and US. They'll lose some sort of license in Australia, and then US, they had like this problem with the SEC recently, and then so they're choking Binance as like one of the biggest place or something that's not controlled by the elites per se, or by the and then next thing you know, like they're choking Binance, and next thing you know, BlackRock is like getting an ETF, right? So I mean, it starts getting pretty obvious, like what's the agenda, and like they want to basically control the asset. So they're gonna sell you paper Bitcoin.
Paper Bitcoin, my God, exactly. I mean, and I think that's probably why Binance has been very smart. I mean, I don't want to give credit to shitcoiners, but they've been very smart in kind of trying to where their holding companies are, and where all these different things are. I mean, they engage in completely unethical stuff, like wash trading and all sorts of other bullshit, which I think is that's just got to go. I mean, and I'd love to just see that casino just burn down. But in terms of like, they don't really seem to have like an actual HQ anywhere. And I don't think CZ would step foot in the US because he would be arrested on the spot. And it seems is that, it's almost like TradFi is now coming in. And while some people are celebrating, I think there's also, it makes sense what you're saying, in the sense that, I mean, the timing is quite unusual. You've got this huge amount of focus that's going against these casinos, and then suddenly the swath of like, all the who's who of the financial institutions globally are suddenly like, we're ready now with this for Bitcoin ETF. And you think, So it's very obvious in that sense. Like I kind of want to say to plebs and just people like there's this almost like this window of opportunity that's shrinking by the day.
Yes.
And I'm like, get as much of this Bitcoin as you can, because I think there will be a day when there'll just be like these massive handbrakes and they'll create so much friction that the average person might just be like, oh, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, and like, I mean, hard to tell what would be the outcome for Bitcoin then, right? Like, would it go up? Would it go down if people are not allowed to purchase? And like, yeah.
That's an interesting question.
Mm,
I think what we do know is that Bitcoin is resilient and
mm,
anti-fragile, no matter what. Every time somebody tries to clamp it down, it's almost like they're doing marketing for it, you know. And
100%.
so that's the single most obvious sign, I think, for the average person to be like, hey, geez, when these guys are clamping down on this, it's almost a signal that I should try and get some. Obviously, they can't stop transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could also say, look, there'll be circular economies, but it would be, I think it would slow down. It would slow down sort of at least price appreciation dramatically if effectively
Yeah.
with the G7 nations, as well as the BRICS nations, like shut off the on-ramps and off-ramps. Do you know what I mean? That would be devastating. And so, yeah, I guess that's what makes it a risk. I mean, you know, we feel like it is the actual code and the way that it operates and functions and its anti-fragility is to me like it's not risky because I can trust it, because I don't have to trust the person. But what happens in the next 5, 10, even 20 years, nobody knows, man. I think.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And speaking of that, about the BRICS nations, it's these nations are saying that the US dollar doesn't have any value anymore, right? I think someone pointed out this interesting thing that China was doing is like they had all this US debt, or they still have, but what they were doing is they were giving it out as loans to other countries. So they're giving it out to loans to like some other African nations or other Asian nations, and then these countries can't pay back the loans. So basically, they got rid of their dollars, but now they have assets in these countries in terms of land or whatever they've built, infrastructure, bridges, and then they can have a military base in there or whatever, right? And
Exactly. It's an economic colonialism, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then these other countries are left with like this with the US dollar, which is probably at the same time, something I learned recently that India is doing, probably not true, probably true, but very likely to be true, is we have big hydro projects in the Himalayas, and apparently there's heaps of miners running there.
Oh, interesting. Wow, that's actually news. Yeah, Bitcoin mining is also one of those things that like I think its image is actually improving. But I guess what you were saying with just before we go into the mining side, what you were saying about sort of what China's doing is like I feel like I've been like a lone ranger, just at least screaming from the mountaintop and being like, China is like an existential threat, and it, you know, at least speaking with my kind of normie mates, it just didn't feel like there was the sense of urgency. And then Trump was called a racist, and then suddenly it's now okay because Biden's saying it, and it's like, yeah, this is what they've been doing in Africa, and I've seen it. And you know, they go in, they build shitty infrastructure with shitty materials, with their shitty staff, they don't do any local employment. Exactly like you described, they take their dollars, they're loaning it out. And one of the hardest thing for these African nations is they've got to make sure that they keep their US dollar debt down, because their worthless fiat is just completely up and down all over the show. Yeah. So what South Africa has done well, incidentally, is have very little US dollar debt relative to rand denominated debt. So people trust the rand more so than, let's say, the Malawian kwacha or whatever that might be. So what they'll do is they'll go in with their US dollars, as you say, get that infrastructure or build it or buy it. And then when they inevitably default because it's full of corrupt governments, they will say, thanks very much. We now have an airport in Tanzania, which is one of the most recent ones. and they're also colonizing Sri Lanka the same way. So
Yes.
it's pretty obvious. But then you could also say the US has been doing this in a different way, where, you know, they've literally, I think they've got like 85 military bases around the world. And you know, it's that's why I always say there's not like good guys or bad guys. They're all doing the same thing. It's just, I think it's quite obvious now what's happening with China, and most people were asleep, I think, for a long time. Yes, on the mining side, actually, sort of, so that's interesting you say like it's happening out there in the Himalayas, but are there communities that could actually benefit from this infrastructure potentially that could be built out? Or is it all going kind of flowing down the mountain and the communities are like bloody 400 kilometers away?
So yeah, I mean, these from my understanding, these are government-run operations. So yeah, not local. Yeah, not by the community is there because I've lived in villages in the Himalayas, and it's like, yeah, some of these villages are totally remote. There's no road access or anything. The only way you can get there is like, yeah, you probably have to trek for 2 hours.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. On a separate note, I want to go and find a snow leopard one day. But anyway, that's that's a separate chat. I want to touch on a couple of philosophical things, because it seems like, you know, you do dig the sort of philosophical side of things, and with, you know, with Bitcoin in particular. Toxic maximalism, it's something that's been I've been thinking about a little bit of late, and we've got all ranges of it. You know, I think we can all say that Bitcoin's the only thing that matters. I think where the differentiation comes in is like, well, what's your approach? You know, some people are like, it's almost like parenting. Do you know what I mean? Not in a funny way, but it's like you got this very disciplinarian, like, I will not tolerate anything else. You step out of line, I'm going to smack your ass. And then you've got like a very caring, nurturing, I understand, I was once you, come in. And I don't know, where do you sort of find yourself on the scale of sort of toxic maximalism? And what are your thoughts around the whole thing?
Yeah, I guess I've not been a parent, but I'm not a parent yet. So, but
that
I'd
you're
say
aware of.
yeah, I would say it would be like my first approach would be being the nice version, right? Like, oh, you don't need to do this, man. Like, oh, try to be like explain generally, and then depending on how close that individual is to me, is like then get the stick out, I guess.
Exactly. No.
Yeah. And then, I mean, one of my favorite quotes from Satoshi: if you don't get it or you don't understand it, like, I don't have the time, right?
That's it's very good.
After a while, it gets to that stage, is like, I just don't have the time. Like, you do you. I tried my best. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm beginning to feel like, you know, particularly with orange pilling people, it can be a bit of a futile exercise. It's almost like telling someone they need to lose weight. You know, you can look at someone and you go, clearly you need to lose weight, right? And it's not difficult in terms of like intellectually knowing what needs to be done. You just need to move more, eat less, or eat the right kinds of food. You know, this has been known forever. But, you know, comes a point where it's got to come from within. And it's almost like, I think with orange pilling, it's got to come from within. You've got to actually like be open-minded and ready to receive, you know, because if you have got your mind made up, I don't think people are also making decisions with their rational brain. You can try and rationalize with people, but I think unless you put in the time and there's this open-mindedness, I think it's really hard.
And I've seen that happen like with few friends, is like, oh, they're trying to convince their wife about Bitcoin, and then they're not able to get through. But next thing you know, their wife is meeting their old schoolmate from like someone they looked up to, right? And they're like, oh, you heard of this Bitcoin thing? And then it clicks for them. Because it's
yes.
Right? Yeah.
It's so funny you say that.
Yeah.
That's happened in my world, man. My wife was orange pilled, not by me talking to her about it for 2 years, but by other people, by listening to my podcast. Finally, it's like, oh, I got it. So it's exactly the case. It's almost like sometimes there's this aversion to it. If your partner is a Bitcoin or whatever, you almost like, I don't know, like maybe, and you're not, instinctively you just resist because you don't want this person imposing a view, and then suddenly the same message comes from somewhere else, and it's like, interesting. Yeah, okay, that's cool. So toxic maximalism and orange pilling, I think that's an interesting side of things. Let's talk about hyperbitcoinization. It's not like, I mean, people will have different definitions. I'd love to know what you kind of think about it, and if it's inevitable, and if so, when can we expect it?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think I'm not really optimistic about it, honestly. I think it's going to take a while. I think there's going to be lots of struggle from now to when we actually go into a Bitcoinized world. There's going to be, there's lots of struggle, lots of chaos before we get there. The people that control the money supply and the people that and they are the people that are in power, they're not going to let that go easily. There's going to be a big fight. And they're going to try every mean possible to stay in power. So to put a timeline, honestly, I don't know. I don't know how long it's going. Yeah.
It's quite honest. That's quite honest. Yeah, I agree with you in the sense of it's very obvious that we're seeing the signs of resistance right now to a clear shift towards decentralized, whether it's money, communities, ideas. We're seeing just people are trying to reject this overarching, big daddy telling us what to do. And it's not obvious how long this game can persist.
Yeah, I mean, from a Bitcoiner's perspective, or someone that's just around Bitcoiners most of the time, spending time on Twitter or Nostr or wherever, you'd be like, oh, I'm just surrounded by all these Bitcoiners. But if you zoom out a bit and you look at what's happening just in the general world, right? Like how many people, like you go to a shopping mall, how many people down there know about Bitcoin? Or maybe they've heard about it, but how many of them are going to be like, oh, like the Bitcoin is this thing that I need to fight for, right? And there's probably a handful, probably less.
Totally.
So, but by the time the message gets through to the masses that like this is what we're supposed to do, there's going to be conflicting messages that they're going to receive as well, right? Like even while they're understanding this thing as Bitcoin, there's going to be like, oh, don't look at this Bitcoin crypto thing because there's like, look at FTX or look at this or all these kind of messaging that's going to be across. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah,
at the same time, like if there's going to be regions like El Salvador or other South American pockets where there's a Bitcoin community, and if that starts getting broadcasted in a proper manner, I guess we can come to a hyper Bitcoinized world sooner than we think. So,
the more success you see with El Salvador in particular, the more it will embolden other countries to follow suit. It's always like you don't want to be the first one to jump in the water because you might literally drown. So you'll just wait for somebody else to get in there, and then soon enough, everyone will be jumping in. But I go back and forth all the time because sometimes I think, oh man, this Bitcoin is just so inevitable. They can't do anything. And like, I just imagine, because maybe you'll relate to this because I love UFC so much. I just imagine like these incredibly resilient individuals who can just walk through punches and just keep taking it and then fight through to the fifth round and submit the guy with blood all over his face. Like that's what I think Bitcoin can do. And I think sometimes it'll be done over in the first round, because I think we're not even out the first round. Other times I go, this could be like 30 years, this could be 40 years. Like this could be we could be sideways for like a decade, because 100%. There's like an incredible amount of resistance. So nothing is certain. And but when you think, because this was actually a question I was going to ask you, when you think about the future, are you sort of leaning towards the more pessimistic side where it's like the dystopian CBDC, kind of world, or are you more optimistic?
Pessimistic.
There we go. Yeah. It's
I sent you something that I recently wrote. I don't think you had it was just like 10 minutes before we actually got recording, right? But it's like that's a weird concept that just came out of my head. I put it down on paper. Anyways, just looking at the way we are going with the technology we are creating at the moment is we have like Apple is releasing this new ski mask thing, right? So I mean, like 5 years down the line, everyone's going to be wearing ski mask while they're on the road, out and about. They'll probably get sleeker or whatever, but everyone's going to have that. Probably have a battery pack in the back pocket and ski mask on. And that's going to be the world that we are living in, right? And we keep going down this technology path. And next thing you know, we are replacing knees for robotic knees, replacing arms. And like, I don't know to what extent we could keep going, because there's the chip that's going to be put into our brain. Then we don't need the ski mask anymore. And then we can get data stream straight to our senses, right? We can experience everything. So if that's the case and we keep going down this path, I mean, the information that we feed ourselves, rather not what we feed ourselves, that information that we are going to be fed is going to be, yeah, it's going to just propagate like the same agenda that's still in place, or not, or whatever that new agenda is going to be, as in CBDCs, or this is the right thing, because it's just like a frog in a boiling pot of water, right? And we're gradually getting there towards where they want us to be. And I say of this hypothetical day, but like, you know what I'm talking about, like they're gradually taking us in a direction where we want to be. And like, yeah, I guess like with Bitcoin, we have this opportunity to fight back. And then there's this urgency to educate more people about the importance of it. But we're doing, I mean, I guess we're doing our best to do like to get more people on board. At the same time, like it's just like, yeah, which one's going to be the stronger force? We got to wait and see, right?
Yes, man. Yeah, those are some wild thoughts, and I skimmed read it briefly before we hopped on, and yeah, just looking at all those things, like, oh gosh, there's some like weird things. I mean, even like the synthetic uterus, I was like, oh my god. You're like, I don't want to ruin my body. I'd rather just grow my baby in a synthetic uterus. And I'm like, what kind of world? I mean, are we going to be living in? There are all these sorts of things. And there is that sense of like inevitability about a lot of that tech. But I also am very encouraged by what I can kind of see in the growth of small communities and people wanting, like, just for example, take food, like the Australian beef initiative or the beef initiative overseas there in the US. People really trying to get close to the source of meat and kind of realizing, actually, I don't get all the nutrients from the cow unless the cow is actually eating real food. And I don't want all this GMO corn-fed garbage. I want like actual grass-fed cows, which they're supposed to eat, you know. And so people are now finding ways to engage directly with the suppliers. I'm thinking like, okay, so let's say you go to a school and your school is like pushing some sort of woke ideology, and your kids are coming home and like, you know, with pink hair and identifying as cats or something. You go like, this is bullshit. I'm going to go to a different school. And I think that'll happen, you know. And so I see a very bifurcated world. And so on the one hand, I think there is this world of just like a complete shit show of like a technocratic state run by sort of people who've always run the show, you know, people with, you know, deep pockets and that sort of thing, with a lot of power, who are able to just control, I don't want to say like, I suppose the masses, the people who just want to literally, you know, earn a salary, get home, watch TV on the couch, watch the footy and have a barbecue on the weekend and do it all over again. Then you got these other people who want to kind of create their own communities and go like, we want to grow our own food. We want to live like connected, healthy lives. We want our children to be independent, free thinkers. They don't want to be brainwashed by all this government propaganda. And I'm also very encouraged by the media, man. Like what you and I do, having conversations, like, you know, these people had all the power. They could just tell lies, and there was no real way for people to know. I'll tell you one story. Sorry, I realize I'm talking a bit here, but my parents actually, when my mom went and did like a gap year or something in England, she went to a kibbutz in Israel afterwards. But while she was in the UK, people were like, "Oh, you know, what's happening with like Nelson Mandela?" And she was like, "Oh, I'm not too sure." And then somebody said something about Steve Biko, and Steve Biko was like this very famous activist who, I think he was chucked out of a building. Okay. So they were resisting the apartheid state, and he was part of the ANC underground sort of movement that was trying to overthrow them, and they killed him. They effectively murdered him. And this was news in the UK, but it wasn't news in South Africa. So my mom, like, literally, when she phoned home, and, you know, you can imagine an old payphone, speaking to the grandparents, it was like, like, who's Steve Biko? Like, that's the extent to which the machine had suppressed information. So, but you can't do that shit today. I mean, that's what's encouraging to me, man.
Yeah, 100%. And like another thought I had while you're saying, like, oh, we're going to go into these smaller communities, and like the communities are going to prosper. We're going to have our own food. We're going to be, the community will be resistant to everything that's happening outside, right? Now, another weird thought is, I imagine this world where the tribes or the existing tribes around South America or wherever, right? There's probably tribes in Africa, tribes in India, or tribes wherever in the world, must have had the same thought, like, I don't want to go to this industrial world. We're going to have a community here. We are going to be self-sustained. And then this next thing, is like this industrial world is like, just ran off in another direction, and these guys are gone down a different path. So in saying that, so like what that would look like, this Bitcoin community is there where they have their own money, they farm their own food, blah, blah, blah. And then there's just going to be this crazy world where people are wearing ski masks and have robotic legs or whatever. And who's to say that's not going to happen?
Yeah. That's actually an interesting way of looking at it, because you got people that got totally left behind by the Industrial Revolution, and you could say that we might be the people who actually just opt out rather than saying got left behind. Maybe we just like, no, I'm not playing that game. But it's a very interesting thing to think of, and sometimes I just want to be like put to sleep and be like, wake me up in like 5 years, tell me what's happening, man, because it's like. And sometimes you see these things happening, and like, because you know the sovereign individual thesis and the way things are going, like I also tied into the fourth turning, where you've got these generational cycles, and we're kind of at the end of the fourth turnings, and I think we're balls deep in the fourth turning, and that's why we're seeing so much chaos and so much anger and hostility in the youth. So I think from something from that will spring something really positive. Like various types of plant species need to be burned to the ground before they can ever grow again. And it might be, I think the same applies with our society. So, but we're living through it all. And I'm just grateful that we've got some. I think for me, Bitcoin is hope. That's why when
100%.
I think about it, I would feel very negative about the future otherwise.
No, 100%. I mean, same. I mean, the amount of if you're just open to what's actually happening around you, and you have an eye for what's truly happening around you, you'd live in a dark place, like, unless you find hope in something like Bitcoin. And people do find hope and strength in other aspects, and like but Bitcoin is like this one thing that can. Bitcoin is one thing where you can truly take and say fuck you to the man, right?
yes, exactly. That's the I'll clip that. That's going to be one of the bits, because that's brilliant. Exactly, because it's a peaceful process. It's a peaceful fuck you. It's like, I'm not participating in your games, thanks very much, and there's nothing you can do. It is that. And then obviously we've got other aspects that we can sort of look at, where it's like your friends and your family. You can surround yourself with really great people who can make life really worthwhile, and like, that's really what the quality of life for me is about. Who am I spending my time with? And since meeting Bitcoiners like you in real life, it's just every time I have a conversation with a Bitcoiner, I'm just like, I've got energy, man. Like sometimes 100%. I find in the Fiat world, because I'm still sort of straddled there, I'll have a conversation with someone, and I'll be walking along the street with them, and I'll just be asking questions on autopilot, and I'm not even listening, and I just think like to myself. Whereas when I'm in these conversations, man, I'm so engaged, and I get so much value from people like you and the broader community. I'm going like, I'm just grateful, and it's really exciting. It's quasi-religious in a way. It's like a secular religion, but it's awesome. I want to touch on one more thing, man. So tell us a little bit about this jiu-jitsu, because I think it seems to be something that I've seen along with quite a few Bitcoiners who do jiu-jitsu. And I don't know if it's about like doing something that's hard, or if it requires proof of work in a sense, or what it is. But like, is there some sort of link between the two, or just tell us your story there?
I mean, I'll touch on one thing before I go to my own story. I was reading this book. It's called "This Is How They Tell Me the World's Gonna End," or something on those lines. And basically, yeah, this is a researcher, and she's been looking into not cyber crime, but like just cyber attacks. And but it goes back to pre-computers, even like when the Russian and US government were using typewriters to like spy on each other, blah blah blah. And
Okay.
then yeah, there's like the Russian embassy. I mean, yeah, there's like Russian kids that gifted a US embassy like a small wooden statue, but it's been chipped with like all sort of listening devices and all. And this is back in the 60s. And then you come fast forward to today, and then there's like governments that pay the most amount of money for 0 days. For people that are listening, 0 days are exploits or computer hacks where they have a backdoor to your system. They can switch on your webcam. They can probably, like, depending on the 0 day, they can do all sorts of stuff. And yeah, just monitor your keystrokes and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and the biggest purchasers for 0 days are nation states. So yeah, and yeah, that just became a wild market with 0 days and all. And I forgot why I started talking about this. But yeah, one thing that this lady or this researcher pointed out is like she used to go for all these conferences, really underground stuff, like with all these hackers from around the world. They call them as white hats and black hats. White hats are the good guys, black hats are the bad guys. But one thing they all share in common is that they train jiu-jitsu, they at this hacking events they used to have jiu-jitsu competitions. So
Wow.
yeah, and yeah, like only recently learned about this. But yeah, so I'm not sure what it is exactly and why, but I can now go speak about myself per se. It's like probably 3 years ago, yeah, that was when I started. And I just had this, I used to work out a bit. I just had this drive, like one day is like, oh, I need to go like punch a bag or something. I just had like this excess energy to need to let out. And it's like, oh, I need to learn a martial art. And I started like researching which one's the best. And then apparently, not apparently, but all the early MMA fights, because that was martial art versus martial art. It was not mixed martial arts. So it's a boxer versus a wrestler, or blah blah blah. And all these early MMA fights were always dominated by jiu-jitsu players. Like, oh, okay, what's this strange jiu-jitsu thing? And then I was like, okay, I'll go for this class, give it a shot, blah blah blah. And then I was like watching some YouTube content, and he's like, I remember saying like, or reading or watching, and it's like, for the first few months, you're only going to get hammered. You just ride that through, and then you slowly start like, yeah, getting less hammered, and then slowly you'll be the one doing the hammering, right?
Yeah.
So that's been the journey, and I think it's that the initial phase is like, yeah, just getting through it. I was chatting with another friend as well, and he's like, his kids train jiu-jitsu and gymnastics, and he's like, why is it like it's this most, so why more people are not doing both these sports? It's like, it's because it's not like football or cricket where you get to kick the ball and like you're doing something. It's like one of the most challenging things that you're actually doing in jiu-jitsu or gymnastics. And like there's like lots of struggle before you actually can achieve something or do something.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I've trained a handful of classes and I've got shoulder problems, so I've actually can't because it keeps popping out. But yeah, that's so interesting, man, because it just seems as if there's like this mountain to climb initially, and it's not about using strength, it's about technique.
Yes.
And you know, a lot of guys who start, they just muscle their way out of chokes and do all sorts of stuff, but it's actually all just, it's almost like choreography, you know, choreography in a sense. You can, there's certain like defenses to certain moves, and you think you kind of laying traps and you're trying to get them comfortable in this role, and then it's just, it sounds so exciting.
So they call it another word for jiu-jitsu is human chess. Because you're probably like baiting your neck, right? So like they'll be like, oh, I can choke this guy's neck. But what the other person is doing while they're coming to choke your neck is they're letting their arm out a bit, a little too far from their body, and it's just giving me enough room to break their arm, basically.
Yeah.
So so it's quite interesting. I'll tell you So yeah, I just randomly, like, I found the closest gym to me and I found the time that suited, like the time that they had trained. And
Yeah.
the head coach that I train, the gym that I train at, apparently he's the best in Australia. He was the jiu-jitsu coach at Bruce Lee's gym in the States.
Sure.
Yeah, he's trained with the early, like one of the best wrestlers in the States, or Olympic wrestlers. Yeah, trained with all the Brazilian dudes, like, yeah. And then he's originally from Australia, so he's based in Melbourne, but he also trained most of the AFL teams. He was recently training sumo wrestlers in Japan.
Phenomenal. It's really interesting. It's something that just pops up, and obviously I'm a Joe Rogan fan, so he loves to talk about it. And it seems as if a lot of the guests that go on subsequently like started, like Jocko Willink and all these kind of people just doing it, and Lex Friedman and whatever. And yeah, it's almost like an intellectual game, and I don't think, like, people don't understand that, and it just looks like sort of what my friend called aggressive hugging. Homoerotic aggressive hugging.
Yeah. Like it's
they can't
sort
figure
of
out
looks
what it
gay.
is.
Right?
Yeah.
100%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I thought we'd just sort of touch on that one.
Yeah.
Meyrick, is there anything else that you'd like the listeners to hear, or that you want to share, whether it's about you or about your company, or I mean, any other topics you're keen to touch on, or before we close out?
No, nothing in particular that sticks out for me. Yeah. I mean, I do want to, in terms of a company, as long as the listeners are going to a Bitcoin only exchange, that's what matters. As long as they are, you see the value prop for Bitcoin only and why, and then supporting exchanges that are Bitcoin only. That's the main focus. Like we have, like, as you said, we pointed out, there's like 5 in Australia. Go to either one, whichever you find easy or the best to use, go ahead and use them. But yeah, make sure it's like, Bitcoin only, support the Bitcoin businesses, and teach your family and friends about Bitcoin. Yeah.
Sounds good, man. Awesome. Well, I'd like you to please show your podcast. Get a little because I think you don't you're not huge on these self-promotion. So please show your podcast and tell the listeners where they can find you.
Right. Yeah, I think the best place to connect with me would be on Twitter. I think we use Twitter more. Probably we should all be using Nostr more, but yeah, we get there slowly. And my podcast is just called Meyrick's Dabbling Path. It's DABB, I guess, LING Path. And
there you go.
And you'd have it in the show notes, I guess.
Absolutely, man. You just
okay. So I'm not going to spell it out, and then you can find it in the show notes. Check it out. Dale was, I think, after I had Dale on, I recently didn't record any episode, but soon there'll be, I have things lined up.
Great. Awesome, man. This has been rad. Really enjoyed chatting to you, man. And all the best, and hopefully we can catch up in person soon.
Yeah, likewise, Dale. Really lovely speaking with you, and thanks for having me.
Awesome.
And hopefully we catch up soon. You're going to be at the next pushback.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you got some value out of it. Either way, hit me up on Twitter and let me know what you think. My handle is Dale21M. If you've got any suggestions as to people you think I should be talking to or topics I should address too, I would love that sort of feedback. Otherwise, if you want to support the show, there's a couple different ways you can do that. The first is just to share it amongst your friends and family. The more that people hear the message that Bitcoin and crypto are not the same thing, the better. And I want to help people understand that. The second thing you can do is give me a 5-star review on whichever podcast app you're using. Of course, that's only if I deserve it. And last but not least, if you want to stream sats my way via the Fountain app, I'm not going to say no, but it's not expected. Thank you so much for your support thus far. It means the world to me. I appreciate the hell out of you, and the best is yet to come. Much love, friends. I'll see you on the other side.